What's up, y'all? This is Lou. So right now, let's discuss the feds, the federal government. Um, Increasingly over time throughout my life, and being as I'm a Gen Xer, I'm starting to get up there in years. uh, I've noticed that the sentiment towards the federal government has gotten progressively worse over time, and me being the type of person that I am, anytime a lot of people don't like something, it inspires me to look into the origins of the thing and like what was its intended purpose. So we have a federal government, we have a central government, right? Uh you have elected officials who enact policy, which is supposed to reflect the will of the people. The democratic experiment, something that the U.S., the United States of America, was supposed to be unique in the practice with. Now, slowly over time, not only have people um, not been very enthusiastic about the government, but we have government officials who are not enthusiastic about the government, which that that's something that sets off an alarm bell with me. Like, why, if you ran for elected office, why are you now trying to convince me that government is bad? That's kind of silly. So why would anybody do that? For the main reason is they're paid to. But in my last video, we already discussed the donor class and how politicians are bribed. But why would somebody be so emboldened to do that? And what do I feel is the motive behind them being paid to run for office in order to tell people that government is bad, in order to convince us that government is not our friend? You are government. So essentially you're saying you're not my friend. Okay, all right. Well, what's the purpose of the federal government? So we have a constitution, right? We have a constitution with ratified amendments, basically rules that everyone has to follow. Why would anyone want to disband the mechanism by which those rules come to exist and the method by which they're enforced, which would be the Department of Justice? Well, it's very simple. They don't want those rules anymore. That's it. They don't want those rules anymore. And who is they? They are likely the donor class that I mentioned in the last video, the wealthy people. But how does this serve them? How does disbanding the federal government serve these people? Well, okay. What exactly does the Constitution preserve? It preserves rights, and it preserves a lot of individual rights, like who can vote, what you can and can't discriminate against people for, um, slavery, no longer a thing, child labor, which there are states already pushing back against child labor, no longer a thing. This is what federal protections are for. And, this video is coming on the heels of some activity going on in Tennessee and Missouri, where the federal government is saying, wait a minute, as a state, you are overstepping your power. You don't have the power to do what you're doing with certain legislation that's targeted towards a minority group. That's the biggest function of the federal government right there. Is it essentially protects you from the state you live in. It's like if the state you live in went rogue and just decided suddenly that slavery is okay, the federal government comes in and goes, no, we're not doing that. You can't do that. So why would anyone want that disbanded? Well, because they would want slavery. I've seen Federalist Society lawyers, because here's the problem. These people, they try to be slick about the way they word things when they're being looked at, by a lot of people. When the general population is looking at them, they try to be slick about it. But you can dig into these people's statements and find things that they've said where they think they're only talking to their target audience. And I've seen Federalist Society lawyers argue things like that the 14th and 15th Amendments should never have existed, and the 19th Amendment. They say weird stuff like, well, I mean, the states were eventually going to let black people vote on their own, so we didn't need a constitutional amendment to protect that. Nonsense. Anyone who knows the history of this country should know that that is absolute nonsense. Well, eventually they were going to have to let women to vote. So we really didn't need a constitutional amendment for that either. I mean, that right there undermines two of the greatest progressive movements in American history. The women's rights movement, women's suffrage, and the civil rights movement, perpetuated by black people for their own rights. So if you roll back those rights, who then gets the power again? Now, a lot of people are going to, look at me and say, Lou, are you talking about white people? I am, but I'm also talking about wealthy people, because that's where it's going to come back to. I mean, poor white people aren't regarded much higher than minorities, because again, we're all the working class. If you are not wealthy, they don't care about you. So you're the same as me. You see, I'm brown, you're the same. You work in that factory. In fact, we're gonna make you work, and we're gonna pay you so little that you're gonna bring your children to work, because that's the only way you're going to survive. Now, with unionization, with movement on your left, that's fought back against. So if they depower all of that and roll back these federal protections, then you're not protected. It's legal for your state to do whatever you want. So I want you guys to keep this in mind when you hate on the federal government. Who told you to hate on the federal government, and why? Oh, it's inefficient? You're right. It is inefficient. There's a lot of needless bureaucracy. I have some personal stories going on in my family right now dealing with inefficient governance, bureaucracy, and nonsense, and how privatization is affecting a member of my family who really needs support at this point in her life. But at the same time, my mother told me that the government body that she had to deal with for the situation, they did their job. So on anything, the privatized side is the side that's holding things up. But the point I'm making is, be careful who is poisoning your mind against the idea of there being a federal government, because what they're essentially saying is that you should be unprotected against the forces of the state. Like, at that point, the state can essentially decide anything. I tend to say that people who think like this kind of want to form a new confederacy. But the point of the matter is, you won't, your voting rights won't be protected. And this should really stand out to Second Amendment advocates, even though you're greatly misinterpreting the whole point of the Second Amendment. But still, if you run around saying Second Amendment, Second Amendment, Second Amendment, if the federal government is disbanded, Second Amendment doesn't exist. The Constitution goes in the toilet. It doesn't exist. And a certain ex-president openly said we should get rid of the Constitution. What does that tell you? So please keep this in mind. Look at what the federal government actually does and how that affects your life. This has been Lou, on your left.